conclusion of the story of Numbers 13, of the 12 spies going into the promised land. At the end of 10 coming back and saying, the land is beautiful, but we can't get past the giants. And the 2 saying, the land is beautiful, Joshua and Caleb, and if God is with us, we surely can. The people, of course, listen to the 10 who panic. And Israel panics, and they want to get rid of the leaders. They want to go back to Egypt, all of which we'll read shortly. But notice what is said by God in Numbers chapter 14 in verse 20. After Moses has appealed for mercy, after the people are trying their best to ignore the mercy God's trying to offer them. In verse 20, then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. But truly as I live and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. None of those who despise me shall see it, but my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. Now since the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valleys, turn tomorrow and set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. Caleb is described as having a different spirit and following the Lord fully. This morning, we're not just going to have a different spirit. I want us to think of a different word that didn't fit on the title slide. I want us to be positive people. And that's one of those words that has a lot of different meanings, and I mean 2 of them. There is positive as opposed to negative, and in terms of charge and things, I do not mean. So engineers, turn that part of your brain off. I know you can't, just try. I'm not talking about that. Positive instead of negative, meaning you might say emotionally, or I'm choosing to be optimistic versus pessimistic. Caleb is positive that I can do things, but more than that, the second meaning, when someone says, are you sure this will happen? You say, I am positive. Weirdly, no one ever says I am negative to that. I haven't quite figured out the linguistics of that. But you say I am positive, meaning I am sure. I am certain that what I have said is to come into practice. And so when we talk about positive, we're talking about 2 elements. I am sure that the good things, positive, that God has promised to me will take place. We need to have a different spirit than the world who sees evil and calamity and struggle and anxiety everywhere. And we need to see what is good. And we need to speak that which is good. We need to be positive, certain that God is in charge, God reigns, and God will keep his promises. And that means I can live a life of optimism, not in a touchy-feely way, but in a spirit-driven life, giving me a different spirit to fully follow the Lord as Caleb, and by the way, Joshua did as well. And so when we think about this, go back to the original mission in Numbers 13 and verse 1 and 2. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the people of Israel. So the 12 spies are sent out. And remember, they are sent out, yes, by Moses, but by whose command? The command of the Lord. That is repeated multiple times, which tells us it's pretty important. Before this, though, it's not just that he says, okay, God tells Joshua and Caleb, you guys and 10 others, go and just survey the land. Let's see what we think about it. This was the land, and it wasn't something that was a secret. They knew God had taken them to this point. And by the way, did he do that quietly or quite loudly? Loudly. He had led them by fire. He had led them by cloud. He had worked many miracles. He had separated the Red Sea. They had spared them through the golden calf. They have all of these problems and all of these miracles that God stepped up and solved their problems by. And here they are at the promised land, the land that he had constantly promised, by the way, going back to Abraham, that your descendants will have because I will give it to you. And so he doesn't say go spy out the land. He says, you go look at the land that I've promised you to have. And that's what they do. In verse 17, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up into the Negeb and go up into the hill country and see what the land is and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land, from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob near Lebo Hamath. So God tells Israel to spy out the promised land, and they do just that. Now, when they go to do exactly what they're told to do, check out the promised land, to check out who's there, what is it like, is it forested, is it otherwise, here's what they say in verse 25. At the end of the 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, we came to the land which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. God says, go check out the promised land. Specifically, Moses says, not just the fruit, which they did, but to check out the enemies. What are they like? Are they strong? Is it fortified? Are they big? Are they small? They are told to look at this. I feel like that part gets dropped a lot when we say the story. We go, they focused on all the giants. We're going to talk about that. But notice, part of their mission was to look at the giants. They were to acknowledge that there are people there, perhaps even big, strong, ugly people there. They were supposed to take note of it. Moses doesn't say, hey, see it and then lose your mind about it. He says, just figure it out. Is it there? And we'll make a plan, because this is God's promised land, God's promised people. They were supposed to notice what was there. They weren't supposed to pretend it didn't exist. And that's sometimes the way these lessons go, right? We say, okay, well, I got to be positive. I need to have a different spirit. I just need to only see God everywhere and see no giants. That's not in the setup, and that's not in the follow-through. Caleb saw the giants. He was told to by Moses. He sees them. The difference between Caleb and Joshua and the other 10 is what they do with the information. Having a different spirit does not mean ignoring right and wrong, ignoring giants, ignoring problems. It means figuring out what is the solution. In verse 30 again, Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. So, as is the norm, and I know we're so much more evolved here in this calendar year, but here's 10 people with some bad news. Here's 2 people with some great confident news. What do you think the masses are going to do? Panic. Panic in a heavy way. Numbers 14 and verse 1. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. And Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb do everything they can to try to stop the panic. And here's what Joshua says in verse 6. Joshua and Caleb tear their clothes, and they said in verse 7 to the all congregation of the land of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, verse 8, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. So here's Israel, huge panic. God and his servant saying, please don't do that. I am with you. Don't do that. God is with us. Do not fear. God is with us. God is stronger. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry. Verse 10, they worried. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. But the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. Even in the midst of all of this panic, though, did you notice that Joshua and Caleb, albeit frustrated, albeit sorrowful, tearing their clothes, they remain faithful? Despite the fact they're surrounded by people with, let's say, a different spirit in the negative direction. They didn't let their dedication to God be dampened by God's people, sinful and otherwise, surrounding them and panicking and fearing when God said don't. Caleb and Joshua stand out not just in the text, but by God. They are commended explicitly by God, and as we've already read, they are spared by God. Caleb and Joshua get what that basically no one else is going to get as a result of their lack of faith. They're going to survive the wilderness wanderings, which, by the way, can you imagine having to then wander with the people who made you get in trouble and wander the wilderness for 40 years? Can you imagine how angry Joshua and Caleb had to be? That's an exercise in letting go of bitterness all into itself. But they get to go into the promised land. They get to receive what God had promised because they were faithful. When God says, I will do it, and you believe it and you hold on to it, God keeps his promise. He may not keep it for the people who reject him. In fact, he won't. But for those who stay faithful, God sees you. He will spare you. He will protect you. He will deliver you. And so the question of the morning is, how did Caleb stay so, can we keep using the word, positive? In the midst of seeing giants that he was told to see, in the midst of people being the worst, and then when he tried to calm down the people, they actually made it even worse than that. They kind of bottom out. They say, we should go back into Egyptian slavery. They reason with them, and they go, no, we'd rather just kill you. That's the way Numbers 14 reads. So how does he stay positive? Well, one of those is when he's looking at the giants, his mind is constantly on God. In verse 30, he says, we can overcome. We can do it. It is echoed in verse 6 and 7, particularly by Joshua, saying the land was good. But verse 8, if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. We're going to talk about the promise in a moment. But right now, he's focused on God's power. He says, yeah, the giants are real. Yeah, y'all are the worst. But if you, the worst, can choose to be faithful, if you can repent of this wickedness and choose to trust God, he's going to deliver us. Because I see the giants, but more importantly, I'm aware of God. And by the way, by being aware of God, it did not diminish the fact that the giants were there. Can I say that too many times? Too many sermons, Bible classes, well-meaning advice whispered in between in the corridors of a classroom and text messages say, don't worry, God's here. That's true. But when you're facing the giant and someone goes, don't look at the giant, the only thing you want to do is focus on the giant. Caleb is aware the giants were there. He was told in advance to scout them. He just knows, I can see you, but I more importantly see the strength of God. God can overcome, and he stays fixated on that fact rather than following the panic, following the noise, following the next giant that popped out of the trees. He's focused on God will provide. And he can do that because God has already made promises and already kept his promises along the way. In verse 8, as is said, if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. The end of verse 9, their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Caleb is able to stay positive in the midst of a people who are panicking and from a situation that could arise some panic in you by saying, God's going to keep his word. God has done this before. We've seen it. He took us out of the very place you're wanting to go back to, right? Oh, it was so much better for us in Egypt, the place where you were crying out to God, please get us out. Anything is better than this. Then they get out, they go, anything would be better than this. We'd rather be back there. People don't do that today, right? We're that annoying in the way we complain about things. He's not worried about that. He's not thinking about their arguments. He's not thinking about the giants. He's focused on God. If I stick with God, God will stick with me. This isn't a guess. God has shown him. God has told him. And it's not him. God's told the whole people. The question is, would Caleb and Joshua, would they as individuals, and the people of Israel as individuals that create a multitude, choose to act on it or not? And that's the difference in our lesson this morning. I'm not talking about how can Christians rise up and be more strong in the world. I'm saying how can I, as a Christian, surrounded by people who have also been told about the promises of God, choose to trust those promises when non-Christians and Christians alike seem to doubt that God? Because that's hard. The giants are distracting, and the wailing people wailing about the giants are distracting. But where's Caleb's focus? It's on neither of those piles. Caleb sees when God keeps his word and gives it, it will be delivered just as he said. He will keep it to the utmost. He didn't worry about anyone. He didn't worry about the panic. He didn't worry, verse 10, about the death threat. He didn't worry about the few faithful he had, Moses, Joshua, and Aaron, in his circle being threatened with death. He just kept on doing the right thing. And first of all, you know who did see that the whole time, by the way? God did. God, who's very angry, verse 11, the Lord said to Moses, how long will those people despise me? How long will they not believe in me in spite of all the things that I have done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you, Moses, a nation greater and mightier than they. In the midst of God's wrath, who does he also see at the conclusion of Moses' plea? Caleb's different spirit. Caleb, who followed him fully. He wasn't worried about what other people were doing. He focused on trusting God. And yeah, he had his teammate. He had Joshua. That makes a big difference. And we say we often feel alone. We often feel outnumbered. Yeah, we are outnumbered. You're not alone down to one, though. This situation is pretty parallel to how we are. We might not be a lot, but there's 3 or 4 of us given a multitude. And by the way, Israel's a pretty big number. So if it is truly just these 4, those are not good odds. I know we read Israel like it's a small family walking around. This is a big multitude at this point. So if it is really just Moses and Aaron, Joshua and Caleb, that's a very depressing number. But it's still not one. And so find one person here. Find one Christian that you can pick up and call and encourage and be encouraged by. To say, hey, I'm getting pounded from every side. And I hope, listen, our congregation is so blessed by God. And so many people here are such a blessing to each other, which is a manifestation of God's great plan, by the way. But even if you are the exception to the rule and we have failed you or let you down or you can't see it, there's no way everyone here failed you. There's got to be 1 or 2 who are still there. You find that positive person, you find that faithful person, and you cling to them. Join with them. Don't worry about the noise. Don't worry about the people in the circle who are failing you. Don't worry about the people outside of the circle who are failing you. So many of the Israelites lost faith immediately because they weren't that faithful to begin with. But there were some on the middle who fell off. That happens too. My faith can't be in what other people do. And my reliance on God can't only go insofar as he does what I want him to. I have to worry about God and not what other people are thinking and saying and doing. And that alone is going to allow me to fulfill verse 24. Hopefully one day God could say this about me and you. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit, and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. When the crowd saw all the danger, they immediately forgot God's promises. But when times were good and times were poor, Joshua and Caleb saw God's promises fulfilled and about to be. And he fixated on that instead. And so his actions led to the very outcome he wanted in the first place. Trusting God to keep his word meant God would keep his word and let him in the promised land. So on the other end of this spectrum, why is it so easy to be negative if we all want to be positive? We all say Joshua and Caleb are the right people. Moses and Aaron are on the right track. We want to be like them, obviously. So why is it so difficult? Well, the first thing is we're constantly surrounded by very real giants. Again, we have to, as Christians, say this. It is really destructive to both faith and faithfulness when people deny the fact because God is real that you don't have issues. That's not true. That has never been the case for God's people. God's people have always had trials and temptations. In the garden, when things were perfect, who was in there? Satan. And by the way, side note, Eve, and apparently all of creation, I don't know how many miles that was, she is standing right next to the one thing in the entire garden that had it out for her, talking with it. That's a bad choice. But he's still real. I can make fun of Eve. I can make fun of Adam's poor leadership and his willingness to follow her right into sin. But the temptation was still there. That was real. Any amount of well-wishing or walking around the garden wouldn't have meant Satan stopped existing. It would have made him less effective, but he would still be there. The giants were to be spied out in advance. They were to be seen and to be known that God would allow Israel to overcome them. We need to face the idea that giants are real, but they're not the end of the story. Yes, there are giants in our path. Yes, there are things that distract me, that take my worry. But I'm supposed to do something with when I see them. I'm supposed to take that concern, that frustration, that anxiety, and do something with it. Look with me in Matthew chapter 6. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 25, Jesus doesn't deny that we face struggles. He says, here's what you do when you face them. Matthew 6:25, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you'll eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Verse 27, which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to the span of life? Verse 30, but if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Jesus says, don't worry. He doesn't say these problems don't exist. He says, don't worry, do what? Trust God. When they doubted, it was a what kind of problem? A faith problem. Faith doesn't deny giants. It just doesn't get hung up on them either. God says, I will provide for your, by the way, very real needs. What you will eat, drink, and wear, those are real needs. I get worried about things that are not real needs. Can we be honest about that? I am worried about sports scores, right? Traffic. If the sermon's actually going to go long because Georgia ruined his day yesterday. All of these things occupy space in my mind. These are not real problems. And yeah, sometimes we do create fake giants, and you need to stop doing that. If there's a fake giant, punch it in the nose and get it off of your plate. But in the meantime, we are going to face real struggles, and the question is, what do I do then? And it's give it to God. That does not mean that the answer is easy. Jesus is telling a group of people who are facing possible starvation, don't worry about it. You know who that sounds great to? Americans who don't worry about starvation. But the Jews who were following Jesus from city to city, who literally might not eat if Jesus didn't stop, this was a real concern. And by the way, it's a valid concern. To survive, not thrive, not enjoy, to live. And Jesus says God knows you are going to face that. Isn't that exactly what happened in Numbers 13? Moses says, go spy out the land, see the giants, see if they're there, and then we'll talk about it. Talk about it meaning what? What Caleb and Joshua said. We can overcome it. If the Lord is with us, their protection is gone. We will take it. We need to, 1 Peter 5:7, take our anxiety and give it to God. Things that we worry about are real, but they need to not stay on our plate. They need to be put on God's shoulders. He's the only one who can handle it. And the other reason negativity is really easy that we got to get to is everyone else in the story. In Numbers 14, the whole of Israel panics. They hear the two sides, they weigh the evidence, and they go, nope, the fearful people, they're right, we're going to die. Everyone else in Numbers 14 is obsessed with negativity, problems, and fear. By the way, this is not an Israelite exclusive problem. I don't know how many times we have to talk about this, but in the news, it bleeds, it leads. If this person's elected, it's the end of America. Somehow that's happened, and half America has been wrong and right for the last 50 years. Constantly, always the worst and the last. And who knows, maybe at some point it will be true statistically. But does it matter what everyone else thinks? God is in charge. God is in control. Why would I worry about something that I can't fix anyway? Has your worrying made anything better? Matthew 6:27, which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to a span of life? Has worrying about who's going to be elected changed the outcome? Action does, but worry does nothing. We are called to be different. Romans 12:1-2, we're to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. Christians are supposed to be radically different than the world. The world sees politics as the answer. It's not. The world sees crime as something terrible. It is. And so if we can have better rules and better policies, we'll fix it. That's not how it works. People who follow after Jesus will do the right thing. Jesus will change and transform a community. Laws will not. Jesus does that. Is there nuance there? Of course. But the problem is when we make it more about laws and structure and things I control instead of what God does and has promised and does control himself, I get really upset when it doesn't go my way. And the more I get upset, the more I worry. The more I get upset and worry, the more I'm likely to, if those aren't independently, sin. And it cascades down. But I'll tell you what can also happen too. It can happen in the church. Look at Matthew chapter 23. Again, I say this from a perceived, none of us can read minds, from a perceived position of strength in our congregation. I think we have a very peaceful, loving group, and this is awesome. So we need to be on guard of this. I'm not saying it's here. I'm saying Satan is always looking how to get in. Matthew 23:13, Jesus is addressing quite rudely and pointedly a group of religious elites. Verse 13, but woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. 15, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land and to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. This is not super gentle, is it? But it's deserved. Jesus is telling the religious elite, you are making it worse for converts than if they were just on their own. Because you're trying to make them like you. You with your fear tactics, and you're puffing yourself up. Verse 23 and 24, what are you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others, you blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. When the 10 spies went out, it wasn't just them who were negative. It wasn't just the lawless, quote-unquote, atheists in the Israel camp. It was essentially everyone. The religious elite can do this too. Have you ever been part of a group of Christians, independently, church, otherwise? They're pretty negative. That's not good either. Just because they wear the name of Christ, really, or just in name tag, doesn't mean that it's okay, everything they do. Sometimes Christians are so focused on the negative that we don't serve God, and he tells us we are to love as he first loved us. Perfect love casts out fear. We are supposed to go beyond that. Should we be afraid of God who can send us to hell? Of course, the Scripture says that. But we're supposed to be reliant on that in a fearful, respectful way that I don't have to face that anymore because God is what? God has promised, if you have a different spirit and follow me fully, what do I have for you? A place of peace with me forever. God promises that. And what are the odds he's going to keep his word? 100%. Negativity sells, and negativity controls. It will control masses, and it will control individuals. Do not let others of any kind, quote-unquote spiritual, quote-unquote communal, quote-unquote political, or otherwise, control you with negativity when Jesus died for your sins. The only thing to be negative about is I have sinned against my God and I need forgiveness. And Jesus has paid the price for that already. It's gone. The thing worth worrying about is off the table as long as I trust Jesus. So don't worry about what other people are saying. You worry about what God has promised. You focus on what God says. Focus how on things in life go the way that God has said, rather than what I tend to do, which is focus on the way things in life don't go the way I think they should have. Right, we see this a couple of different ways. Look with me in 1 Kings 21. 1 Kings chapter 21, as you're turning there, think about 2 Kings 5. I know it's a bit of a mental math problem for people. But as you're turning to 1 Kings 21, think about 2 Kings 5. That is Naaman, the leper. And he's told he can have his leprosy forgiven. We talked about this last week. That as long as you dip in the Jordan 7 times, you can have your leprosy removed. And he goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. He's angry. Behold, I thought. This is not what I wanted. This is not what I thought. So he wasn't going to do it. And he was persuaded out of it. This is how we look when we're like that. 1 Kings 21, verse 1. Now Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. And after this, Ahab said to Naboth, give me your vineyard that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near my house, and I will give you a better vineyard for it, or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money. But Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. And Ahab went into his house vexed and sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him, for he said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face and would eat no food. What would you tell Ahab besides stop being the worst at everything? Be an adult. You're being like a tiny child. You're laying on your bed not eating. You tell him if you're nice to him, you have all the palaces that you could want. You are the king. This is one thing you don't have, and you're pouting over it. Get over it. Think bigger. Think about all the good things in your life, right? We're going to be more positive. Think about all the 19 fields you have. Think about the 20,000 houses that you have. Think about the square foot mansion that you're clearly living in. But we're like him. When people don't act like I want, when things don't fall into my life and they slot into place the way I want them to, I get upset. I get vexed. I get sullen. And that can be wrong. By the way, anytime you're comparable to Ahab, probably wrong. Just as a quick rule of thumb. When I don't get what I want, I get mad. And when I get mad, I tend to act irresponsibly and immaturely like Ahab does. We need to focus less on things going the way I want and more on what has God said about it and what does God want from the situation that I have. Not did God cause this problem, but how can I glorify God in the situation I am in? Does that make it easy? No. The giants are still real. And does that make everyone around me mature? Nope. The world's never going to be on our side, and sometimes Christians might even let me down. But either way, I need to make sure I am fully focusing on trusting God, because the easiest way to be swallowed by negativity is to not be setting my mind on things above, as Paul writes in Colossians 3. The more I think about things down here, the more depressing it gets. The more I think about the way we try to fix this, and then these 18 problems pop up, the way I think about the way I could have done it like this, but they didn't, so it went this way, you can find a million things to be upset about. You can find the giants. They're not hard. They're not hiding. There's big problems in society. There's small problems. There's temporal problems. There's eternal problems. There's physical problems. There's all kinds of problems. But we're supposed to be focused on God, the God who will deliver, the God who has promised you can be my child and you can be with me forever. And we either embrace that like Joshua and Caleb or we don't. So as we conclude, 4 points in the lesson is yours. How can we improve this today and this week? Number one, stop staring at the giants. The giants are real. We need to acknowledge them. The giants are scary, and the giants may even win a battle or two. We can talk about that at a different time. But we need to be fixated on something else, not ignoring it, but not wallowing in it. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. There's a difference in acknowledging the giants and staring at them, having a problem and wallowing in the problem. And I don't think we have to go into too many details to know what that is. Sometimes life gives terrible hands, and that is the worst. But does dwelling on it being the worst make it better at all? I'm not saying that if you stop staring at it, the problem will go away. I'm saying that the more you stare at it, the bigger the problem will get. Focus on God. Caleb knew the giants were there. He just knew his God was bigger. He knew there were enemies there. He knew God would deliver them. We need to stop wallowing in, staring at the giants in our life. Second thing we can do this week, make a point to quit being negative and start being positive. That is with our speech. We need to rejoice always, 1 Thessalonians 5, pray without ceasing. We need to be thankful all the time. That's not just an attitude, although it's primarily an attitude. It is outward. Think about yourself this week. Are you saying negative things? Clock it in your head. It's okay to say negative things. Sometimes negative things are true. Jesus addressed the Pharisees, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. That was not a positive thing. It was necessary, but not positive. Just ask yourself, just keep a running clock for 3 days. Is it like this, negative, positive? Is it like this, positive, negative? Is it neutral? Whatever it is, make it more positive than negative. You find yourself saying 15 negative things and 1 positive, you're not looking in the right places. There's a time and place for negativity, but it's not always and everywhere. Say less negative things, but first recognize that you're saying it. Think about it as you speak. Ask myself, am I talking positively or negatively? And for every negative thing, think or say out loud, I need to be better, and add 2 positive things on top of it. Third thing, make it normal to talk about God. You say, well, how do I be positive? Talk about God. Talk about His power. Talk about His promises. We forget all of these things all the time because we don't talk about them. We leave them in our Bibles at the church building, and then we talk about it on Sunday and Wednesday and hope it'll float us through. And we talk about what's negative on Monday, negative on Tuesday, negative on Thursday, negative on Friday, negative on Saturday, negative on Sunday night, and we're just shocked that we're swallowed by negativity. Christians talk about Christ, and if you don't, it's not a very good Christian. We need to be more like Jesus and talk more about Jesus and talk about all His wonderful promises, that His grace does reach me, that because He lives, I can face tomorrow, that there is good and exciting things happening in this church family and in our lives because God placed them there. God is good all the time, and I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to find it. So the negativity is not going to have a room. And that's going to be because I embrace having a different spirit. I'm going to recognize, as the proverb says in Proverbs 18 and verse 21, that there is power in what I say. It can build up. It can tear down. It can do great good. It